And here we go again. Back to the garden. It's an overcast morning, and the title of this video is Overgrowth. And as we get into Slo-mo, we can see one of my apple trees I planted this year from a seed, and behind it a squash on the ground, and a very overgrown squash plant with various Rosa Sharon flowers falling down. This is the seeding time of the year. This is the 1st of September when I'm making this. Some blades of grass there that actually look like corn plants popping up. Of course there are. Corn is a mutation of grass. So this week I was doing some research about how many people are on Twitter. Look at this mess the birds have made in this area, because the bird feed, we just passed the bird feeder, would have been on the left hand side, but they're like chickens. I've got dozens of birds, regular birds, that feed in this yard, and that whole area is just like given up to the birds. I'm going to jump in and out of making statements about things unrelated to the garden, and then things related directly to the garden. So bear with me. This right now, I see we're coming up on the my stinging nettle plant, which I keep forgetting to cut and add to some of my stir fries. Stinging nettle is one of the most nutritious plants, but if you just brush up against them, you get this. It's like, that's why it got his name, stinging nettle, and you get like a rash. It hurts, and it's a rash, but it's anyway very nutritious. Someone's trying to tell me these are grapevines, and it takes a couple of years for grapes to come on. I hope that's true. Crazy overgrowth of kale. And speaking of squash, I yanked this one out today, this one that I'm zooming in on. It's a pretty big one. Actually, it's the biggest one of those I got. I don't even know what these are. I mean, it's not really a spaghetti squash. It's not a summer squash. I don't know what kind of squash it is. They come out, they're like greenish striped a little bit, but then they kind of change. I don't know. I opened one up the other day. I was to create a stir fry with it. I didn't eat it raw, but it almost smelled a little bit like a cantaloupe, a little bit. For a minute, sweet. But once you cook it, with onions, peppers, and, the various stuff, it just all blends together. I always consider squash, not so much, even zucchinis and stuff, not so much of having a distinctive flavor as of being something that you can add, that absorb flavors, and you add to it, that add bulk to a dish, so that the various seasonings and additives to the soup, salad, stir fry, what have you, tend to, it makes it a full dish. Anyway, excuse me, that's exactly how I look at it anyway. But back to the social media thing. So, this is a criticism, where people don't really think about this. I was curious to see how many people in the United States were on Twitter. And, the first thing I pulled up showed, I guess about a year ago, there were about 66 million. So let's assume there's like, say, 70 million people. And then, and someone might say, well, that's a lot of people. It's really not, considering there's probably 350 million people in the United States. People keep saying 320 million, but, we have a census If the census ever happens in 2020, I think we'll find there's about 350 million or more people here. That said, 70 million is not, not a big number. But then I looked further into that number and I found out that about a third of that 66 million or whatever were actually teens who said that they had Facebook accounts, but it wasn't their primary social media experience. In other words, they were using other things, Instagram, whatever. So they just have accounts and occasionally post or something, but they're not like, Twitter maniacs, like the people who just are on it nonstop. So think about that. So you take, you take out that because, let's look at because I see Twitter as a very more political social media than any of the other medias. Certain social media people are using to try to become influencers, sell things, or their family, communications. Look at me, look at what I've done, that kind of crap. But, Twitter, if you really look at it, I believe it's predominantly opinionated, almost political, very political in a sense. And it's a generalization, not entirely, but generally speaking, it's opinionated. And when it comes to politics, particularly presidential politics, people are, split down the middle and extreme in their viewpoints, right? One side or the other. So, considering that a third of the Twitter users in the U.S. are teens and too young to vote to begin with, and the total number was only, say, 66, that brings you, so you subtract 22 million out of the 66, and you're left with 44. Let's say it's 50 million. Let's move it way up. 50 million people. All right. In the last presidential election, about 100 I think it was 125, close to 125 million, 123, 125 million people voted in a presidential election in 2016. So if you take 120 and then 125 and you look at 45, 50 million people, half of them are Democrats, half of them are Republicans, and unable to budge. Like, in other words, they're so partisan. If anyone just play around, they're so partisan. There are very few people on Twitter that would put a thing on an issue or a thing and say, "I'm curious, how does that work?" or "What does that really mean?" Like, they're not asking what it really is it's people like who are saying, my candidate or my viewpoint or my political party is right, and look at these people, or look at this jerk on the other side, or look at this, this crazy program they're proposing, or look at this. In other words, they're adamant, they're committed to their their party, their viewpoint. I have no idea what that white thing is there. Is it some kind of butterfly, moth, or is it just a leaf? Must be just a leaf. It's weird. Very strange. So anyway, just to follow through with this idea. So these people are crazy every day on Twitter, are making these points and, trying to expose someone on the left or the right, or look at this candidate, or do this. But the idea is it's meaningless, since there's 120 some million people vote in presidential elections, and there's only 40 or 50 million people on Twitter that that may or may not even be voters, but possibly of voting age and and maybe registered to vote, and they're split down the middle partisan wise, that means that anything you say on Twitter is totally just irrelevant to politics. Think about that. There is no substantial amount. You cannot, if you were some person that could influence every person on Twitter, all right, which is ridiculous, but say you had some ability to influence every potential voter on Twitter, you would only reach about 2/3 of one political party. So, and we know that Twitter split, we know this country's pretty much split down the middle. In the last election, it was like Trump got 60 million votes. Hillary Clinton supposedly got 62 or 3 or something weird like that. It was split pretty much down the middle. People were questioning votes and all that stuff. Dead people voted, all this kind of stuff. Duplicate votes. But however you want to look at it, the point in the matter is basically every election, the popular vote usually shows that it's almost evenly matched. And when someone says, well, such and such actually won the popular vote, it's usually, by 1 million or 2. It's never, it's never someone saying, oh yeah, so-and-so won the popular vote by 20 million votes. Doesn't happen. So in effect, the country is split down the middle. 60 million one way, 60 million another way, give or take, whatever the change may be. The margin of error. When you have, there's a 1% to 2% margin of error, statistically in practically everything that's done. And that means it has to do with anything. It could do with, fraud, flaws, bad accounting, all that kind of stuff. So when you're talking about anything over 100 million, you could always count on there being a margin of error of 1 or 2 million people. But that doesn't matter for this conversation. What I'm trying to get at is, and I hope I'm being clear about that, on Twitter, under the best possible scenario, if you were able to convince or reach the entire Twitter sphere, so to speak, you would only be reaching a quarter of the voting public. And half of those people are already partisan one way or the other. So in effect, you're probably reaching, not 1/4, but really 1/8. So it's totally useless. And the numbers with Facebook are a little bit higher, but it's the same deal. When it comes to actually people who are registered to vote, what are the ages of the votes? How partisan are they? In other words, how immovable is a individual? Look at all that parsley. And all that pinkish, purpley stuff to the right, that's all oregano plant. Oregano is going to seed. And of course, this more insane kale that's just growing outrageous. So, and I've talked about this before about cable media and television and the same deal. Like when you look at stations like CNN, for example, and some of their shows have ratings where they reach 300,000 people. But when you tie in like Fox, CNN, MSNBC, these types of stations collectively, they're lucky if they reach about 1% of the United States. And so that's what really cracks me up, even about how people on social media retweet something that was said on CNN, and then everybody jumps on it partisanship-wise one way or the other. So they take something that originally was broadcast on a network that only reaches 1% of the U.S. population, and then they put it onto social, which means that originally 99% of the people never watched it, right? So you have these people on CNN, 99% of America is not watching CNN. That at any given time, that's just how it is. People, you may turn it on one day, you may not. I personally don't even watch it at all. But these are actual ratings, the rating numbers that are kept, on viewership. This isn't something I'm just making up. So they reach less than 1% of the population. Then someone on a partisan social media site picks it up and says, look what this person said, and then they retweet that to this thing that's roughly, reaching another small segment, first of all, giving this small 1% original broadcast a bigger audience, but an audience that still is already partisan, has made up their mind, and so you just get into these partisan arguments back and forth. Well, I guess what I'm trying to really say is the whole thing is a farce. It's a joke, and people take it far too seriously. And the word news junkie, which I throw around all the time, it really is. People are news junkies. They're addicted to sitting there watching the CNNs, Foxes, MSNBCs, all these stations all day long. And then they're tweeting and posting and all this stuff about, oh, look what I just saw on one of these various partisan networks. But they're preaching to the choir, this whole, the echo chamber, all these things are what's really going on, because there really is no impact. It's like when they say, there could be, people could influence the elections by putting ads on Facebook or social media or doing this, that, the other. The thing is, you can't. You could put all the political ads you want, advertise on CNN, Fox, and MSNBC, and all those news junkie stations. If only 1% of the American public's watching those, and those networks are partisan, one side or the other, your ad is not going to convince a single person, one way or the other, right? I mean, do you honestly believe that anyone, who supports President Trump is going to suddenly be enlightened and say, hey, I think I'm going to vote for Bernie Sanders? Or do you honestly believe that someone that's a Bernie Sanders follower, believer in socialist policies and things like that is going to somehow see a Trump ad and say, oh, wow, I guess I didn't realize that. I think I'm not going to vote for Sanders. Ain't going to happen. People have already made their minds up. In fact, the 2020 election is over. If you had it today, it would be the same results as if you had it then. It doesn't really matter. And there's this joke, and there's people day in, day out yelling at each other, trolling each other, doing all this stuff. And it's among these groups of people that don't even make up enough of a percentage of the electorate to make a difference. And so, to put this to an end, is that this has given me faith in America. I was very pessimistic. I was, at a point going, it's all over. People are just so all crazy. This country's gone down the tubes. It's whacked out. Until I started looking into the numbers and realizing that the vast majority of people are out there living regular lives. They don't watch these stupid programs. They're not part of these social media crazy ass things. They're just fucking existing their lives, existing as normal human beings. Pardon me using the F word. But under that plastic thing, I have some cilantro and lettuce growing, which I'm hoping today, September 1, they're up. They're now seedlings. I guess in about 3 weeks I should have. And there's radishes in the foreground we're just passing. I'm hopeful that I'll have cilantro for some salsa in about 3 weeks. And that lettuce, hopefully in the next month I'll be getting some lettuce into October. And of course these are obviously pepper plants. And they should be, I'm getting peppers on the other side. These pepper plants should be producing relatively soon. So there you have it, by the numbers. Social media and network news is for partisan people who are news junkies. And the rest of the people out there in America are just the vast, vast majority of people in America. And I hope this really sinks in if there's anyone who catches this video. The obviously the most unpopular person on YouTube. I get 2 views for my videos. But the funny thing is, it's meaningless. It's absolutely meaningless. And I just can't believe it. There's on the left-hand side there is a bean plant coming up, which I just threw in there. And of course, they're so easy to grow. So that's what my lettuce plants looked like when I first started them. You know, back in May or April. And I was eating lettuce for months. So all I need is 2 of those lettuce plants to, you know, take off over the next 3 weeks. And I'll just be pulling, you know, you take 2 leaves. Once those leaves get big, it's like those big kale plants. You only need a couple leaves to make a salad. You pull a couple of kale leaves, pull a couple of lettuce leaves, pull a couple of Swiss chard leaves, and some various herbs. And we'll look at some tomatoes later on in this video. And you've got a salad. And if you want to cook some kind of stir fry or soup or something else similarly. And these radishes, they'll be ready in probably 2 weeks or less. I just planted this. So I watered the cilantro and it kind of like wilted them down, but hopefully they'll pop up. There's a couple weeds in there I see. We'll get rid of those. It's a very overcast day. But it's been nice the past couple days. It hasn't been too hot. The sun's come out. I believe we're probably going to get some rain later today, which is fine with me. Saves me from having to water. But it's great. Life. How easy it is. Put a seed in the ground and it grows. And it feeds you for months and months and months. I already harvested my potatoes. I've got potatoes in the refrigerator. And I haven't picked up the carrots yet, but I'm sure I got a few dozen carrots in there. Even if I only get a dozen or so, it's fine with me. It's like perfect timing on everything because, you know, as the weather gets cooler, those tuber type plants, you know, you cut up a potato, cut up some carrots, make a nice soup, throw in the various herbs and different things, late garden veggies and your favorite seasonings, a little bit of this, that, the other, and you've got meals. I've come to the point now where I'm eating about half the year from my garden. And last year I had a lot of success with grow lights and things indoors. So, and this is the first year I planted late, things like planting lettuce and, you know, radishes and the cilantro and beans, like planting late for fall planting. So the things that I'll be able to harvest probably into November. But my goal is to be able to grow, well, I'd love to be able to grow food year round, some indoors and the rest outdoors. And that's one of the reasons I put the mini greenhouse out back this year. But the idea is that, yeah, you might as well live off the land. You know what you're eating, tastes better, and well, you save a ton of money, but you just harvest so much. I actually had to throw away 2 lettuce plants because I just couldn't consume the lettuce, and it was beginning to just, well, it was bolting to seed, and just starting to get brown. I mean, which was a real tragedy, because I wish, but anyone who knows lettuce, can't save lettuce. But I ate lettuce for, I don't know, 3 months solid. And, supposedly the kale plants and Swiss chard, I thought those things would have died off because they're cooler weather crops. And instead they just, are out of control. I'm still picking. But how much kale? I've given bags of kale to friends. And these plants just keep producing. So that's the thing about growing. And I've said this before, if this is the first time one of these videos actually gets viewed. But this isn't a big yard I have. This is a relatively small yard. And and I don't have I'm not crazy about, soil management the way, a lot of people online are. I mean, occasionally I'll put in some bag soil, I'll buy, some things. But I'm not, I have a compost pile, but I haven't really gotten into making good compost. So it's, occasionally I'll put in some plant food things, but it's basically just, the earth, rotating crops. Here, this is like real overgrowth here. These were where, in the corner there were my sunflower plants that just died off pretty quick because the bees, pollinated them fairly quickly because they were the only flowers in the whole yard. And then I guess the birds got in and pecked out the sunflower seeds. Luckily I took 2 big ones off before the birds got to them, which I'll use for planting next year. You can see I have carrots just growing. I never weeded this area, so carrots are just growing wild in that spot. But that doesn't really matter. They look very healthy, and I'm sure there's a good amount of carrots under there. So that'll be fun. And speaking of kale, this monster kale plant here, well, there's like 2 or 3 of them that have kind of merged. And while some of those leaves are dying off for whatever reason, and you can see in the front that yellowy stem thing, that's like a kale bolting to seed. But, this blur of kale is just, it's endless. It just keeps producing. It's unbelievable. And kale will resist freezes and things like that. But speaking of like more, bounty, look at this parsley. I honestly thought when this parsley started to bolt, like 2 months ago, I just was trimming off every time it would bolt. But I figured, I didn't have much time left. But look at all that parsley. It's crazy. You can't see it, it's overgrown. This was my 6 square foot gardening, plots here. And parsley was only one of the square foots, but the parsley overtook it. Behind it is sage. I had cilantro in there, but that's already come and gone. That's why I planted new. There was some oregano in there that kind of merged and moved into the oregano where that's what that purple stuff is, as I mentioned before. And there's some Swiss chard in there too. But the parsley is just totally crazily overgrown here. You can see the Swiss chard right down in the lower left-hand side. This happens every year. At this time, things get so overgrown. You focus on certain plants and other ones you just don't keep up with. I mean, how much parsley can one person eat? I was giving like bags of parsley out back in June, to people. And I don't even think the parsley plant was that big back then. Because I have more parsley on the other side too, and more oregano. And this parsley plant will survive the winter. They're biannuals. You usually get 2 years out of them. So that'll be there. You can see some of the little yellow tomatoes there just mixed in with this overgrowth. It's great. So we've covered the fact that network television news, political news, and social media political news is useless, and that the people who are obsessed with it are just basically, wasting their time. And anyone who considers it more than a hobby is a fool, because it's just a hobby. If there is someone open-minded or has an impressionable mind out there, their numbers would be so small that it's not a factor that it's going to sway an election, change the outcome of an election. And once you know that, you realize it's like arguing with a child or something, or arguing with some, for me, if there's no purpose behind what you're doing, why do it? In other words, it's an exercise in futility, as they say, and that's what it's become. So I identify it. I do it as a hobby, in a sense, for no other, for no other reason. I have no. It's like me telling you this now. I'm telling you this, but it's a hobby. I don't care if 2 people see this video. Fine. If one of these odd videos I make goes viral, great. But it doesn't. I don't really care. I'm not making any money on this. I don't. I'm not trying to make your mind change. I'm just sharing, something. Sharing my life. This is what I do. This is my yard. I spend most of my time outside. Half the year I'm out here just, sitting in the sun, or earlier on, for the better part, weeding and tending to my plants. These are all the spearmint plants. And they've obviously got the purple, go to seed things happening there too. Normally these are filled with bees, but it was like I say, I shot this in the morning, a cooler morning. There's a little bit of almost a drizzle out there, so that there weren't really. I heard a little bit of buzzing, but I guess most of the bees was still cool, and most of the bees were just hanging inside. Hadn't come out yet, or may not come out today. Off in the distance, there's some more yellow tomatoes. I'm going to close up on those a little bit later. Sorry for the blur here. These are these crazy flowers, kind of like a marigold on steroids, as they say. 3-foot tall plants, flowers the size of like carnations or something. The bees love these things too. I've got several of these plants all over the yard. They don't look as good as they looked last year though, the flower wise. I don't know what that is. In other words, the flowers aren't as full in the way they were originally. And I don't know if that has to do with, the pollination of the seeds that I saved from last year, because these are from seeds. This is about the 4th year I've, planted from my own seeds. So I guess I've created some kind of out of control, bizarre hybrid is what it is. I just can't get, you see people who grow these marigold plants and they're just these smaller things that just, and I've had them like that and I've had seeds from them. But somehow the way these things got pollinated, cross-pollinated with some, ridiculous tall growth things. I plant these seeds in April and it takes until August until these things, because they won't flower until they're at least over 2 feet tall. Ever hear of anything so crazy? Back in the upper right is, a total dense thicket of oregano and parsley. And then in the foreground, we're coming up to, you could see that Swiss chard in there. That's still, growing wild. But my primary focus now, apart from some little tomato plants that are thrown in here, are what we're coming to right now, are the pepper plants. And while I don't have a lot of peppers right now, I've noticed the past week or so that the bees have been spending a lot of time on all these little white little dangly things, pollinating them. So I'm anticipating that over the next couple weeks I should have a lot of peppers. And this is an assortment of peppers. There's bell peppers in here, jalapeno peppers in here, chili peppers, a poblano pepper. There's some purple pepper in here. I don't think I will have zoomed in on the camera on that, but it's like purple. And then on another one, there's these peppers that, it's not like a bell pepper or whatever, but they're like a very light yellow. But they're not bell shaped. They're not like the bell pepper shape. They're just these round. So I don't know if that's some kind of hybrid too. I've been messing around with seeds the past couple of years, and I nurture these plants, and I guess the bees do the rest. And you put that variety of peppers in a dense area, you're going to get some kind of cross-pollinations and some mutations. That yellowy stuff to the lower right, that's dill. That just grew wild too. I never even planted that. And that's my little outdoor greenhouse that we're getting a little glimpse of here. I have nothing in there right now because when it's 70 or 80 degrees and sunny outside, it gets to be 120 degrees there. I have a fan in there, a small fan, solar fan, but it just doesn't bring the temperature down. For next year, I have a bigger fan and a bigger solar panel that I'll be putting on there, which I'm hoping will take the temperature down from 100 to 120 and keep it down below 80. A lot of plants just can't, unless you're growing some kind of tropical plant. The high 70s is about as high as you want, is ideal temperature for most plants. I mean, you could push about 80, but you just can't go over that. They just it's like when it's the same as if it gets cold. They just kind of stop doing anything. It's either too hot or too cold. The Goldilocks spot for like tomatoes and a lot of these veggies is somewhere, in the 70s. Maybe high 60s, possibly if it's sunny, but somewhere in the 70s is really the Goldilocks spot. This pepper plant in center to left is the one that's got these weird yellow things on it that I have no idea what they are. I'm curious. There was a cucumber plant in there, which I got a couple cucumbers out of already, but what's on it, it looks like it's done its deal. Can't even really make it out right now. There's a lot of buds on that. Mutant marigold, though. That thing's going to still be blooming for another couple of weeks. Fascinating, as Spock would say. So that we know now that politics and media is a fraud, and is all just hyped by people trying to sell basically commercials. um, so much for that. And it wouldn't be a video if I didn't get my thumb somewhere in there on the side there. But I think I caught it this time and good enough. I think actually, it looks like I might be trying to come in here to show these yellow things. I forget. Yeah, that must have been what I was doing. I just shot this morning, but I'll see if the camera gets a glimpse of this thing. Those spearmint plants grow wild. It's just like the mint. I really didn't utilize the mint or the spearmint this year much. Last year I was making a lot of lemonade and putting mint in it and giving it out to some people who were putting it in their tea. I don't know what I was doing there. That's my thumb over the lens. How did I even do that? I'm using my old iPhone. I canceled my cell phone service like a couple years ago, but I still use my iPhone mainly as a camera, and I have one of these things called a Magic Jack. Have you heard of that? You pay $39 a year. I'm not sponsored by them, obviously. You pay like $39 a year, and you get a phone number and this little device. You plug it into your internet, and you can plug your normal house phone into it, and you have a phone service. But it's not $39 a month, it's $39 a year. And you get an app that you can put on your old smartphone. All right? Or even like I have a tablet, an iPad, a tablet. And that turns that into a phone. So if I'm in that instance, you have to be on Wi-Fi. But if I'm, on Wi-Fi, and every place has Wi-Fi now, I basically can use my old iPhone as a phone. I can make calls, receive calls. There's no limit. It's unlimited calls and text and all that stuff. And of course I'm on Wi-Fi, so I have unlimited whatever. Thank God the thumb is out. You can start to get a little glimpse. You see a little yellow under this pepper plant? There's like something yellow in here. It's very weird, but they're like roundish. I have no idea what that is. No idea. Anyway. So yeah, considering that at one point I had a landline and it was paying like $69 a month to Verizon, and had a cell phone, the app I originally paying close to $90 a month to Apple. We're talking about, almost $2,000 a year I was spending on phones. And now I spend about $40 a year on, plus, internet. I have internet. But I've reduced my internet cost down too. I'm basically trying to get to the point where I'm so self-sufficient that I have very minimal amount of basic monthly costs that are more than covered by the things I do. So I no longer need to do outside work. I'm just free to live life, live off the land, and do whatever I do, on my own time, whenever, however I want. The way life is meant to be, really. We're seeing the overgrowth on my little man-made pond here, mini pond. The birds use as a bird bath mainly. It's not a sunny day, so I guess the fountain won't be shooting up, but it's a nice little spot. My broccoli plant in the background. I got a few florets, as they call them, off of it. But I've never had a lot of luck with broccoli. I usually get like one big, the kind of head of broccoli with, you could peel off these florets and maybe some side florets. But I see a lot of people get a lot more. I don't know why, If you heard me gulping, I'm drinking some green tea. And off against the fence, you can see there's more flowers, and again, directly against the fence, where my forest of mint was. And here to the right is my most productive little yellow tomato plants. I've just been getting, a little, every day I get a container. I could fill a little container with these of yellow tomatoes from this plant alone. It's just really productive. Plants, there's like 3 of them in there. And at the supermarket, you can spend anywhere from $3 or $4 for what my daily harvest is out of these things. So if you think about it, if you get 30 days or just every 10 days of $3 would be $30. So you get 3 weeks of tomatoes valued at $3 to $4. You're talking about roughly around $100 worth from. And in this instance, these plants and the other plants around my yard, the little yellow tomatoes, were literally just grown from fallen tomatoes from last year that I saved. And I planted in my greenhouse. And I planted these late because originally this year I planted a lot of determinate tomatoes. I planted like Roma tomatoes and some other determinants from seeds that I had, seed packets. And I didn't do too well with those, and and once they grew, they had that. I still have I think I have 1 tomato left in my house from my tomato plants. And so realizing that I had planted too many determinants instead of indeterminants, so I go, well, I better, do something with these. So I planted these a little bit later. Wasn't until in June, I think. And sure enough, these things are producing great. So again, when you tally up the amount of money you save by growing quality food, and really doing nothing. And this year it rained so much that it wasn't as if I had to even water. And where I planted these against this fence, there was no special soil or anything. I just literally put them in the ground. In fact, that was a spot I never really planted anything in before. So I just dug out some holes, put in 3 or 4 tomato plants that I had grown from my own, tomato seeds in the greenhouse to get them to seedlings, put them in there, put some mulch around them. And of course now it's overgrown. Like I say, I'm guilty of doing this every year. I don't know if next year, it's like at this point, it's like sometime in late October, early November, I'll have to come in here and clean all this stuff out. And it's usually best to wait till it all turns brown and it's easy to just rip it all out. So as long as I can squeeze in there and fill a little container with tomatoes or pull, leaves off of the various plants and herbs, it's fine. There's no reason to just get rid of these other weeds. They're really not choking anything off at this point. They're just growing. And I believe a lot of those taller things against the fence are Rose of Sharon. My idea is to allow these Rose of Sharon plants to grow almost like a hedge up through and over that fence. And just to create a border. I live next to there's a doctor's office, and that's like their kind of a throughway parking lot that their nurses use or something. And so for privacy's sake, I want that to be a little bit higher. Plus I like the idea of being surrounded by green. It's just, the air is so much fresher. So that's the name of that too. So I'm glad you could join me for this almost hour, about 53 minutes or something. And if you've never had these yellow tomatoes, they're like candy. I mean, you just pick one right off the vine there and put it in your mouth, and it's like sweet and just so tasty. They're great. Like I say, and they're very easy to grow from year to year. Tomatoes in general, I have found, are fairly easy to grow from tomato seed, from an actual tomato that you've had. So, and as you can see from things that are falling on the ground there, and all the numbers of them in there that the ones I won't reach, that they'll all end up, I'll save those and I'll grow them next year. And last year I just put a bunch of these in a like a flower pot, like fallen tomatoes. With the goal of, I knew I was going to plant them again, but I just left them in the yard, and it froze, and it was snow covered and all this kind of stuff, but it didn't affect anything. So when the spring came, I just grabbed those, then defrosted, tomatoes left. And that's what you're seeing. That's what grew here. This gives you an idea of that building, how there's a parking lot next door. Oh, I know. And it's great. Before this ends, I got one morning glory. You can see that purple thing. And my apple tree is doing fantastic. It's about 7 feet tall now. And my other apple tree behind the one in the foreground is up to about 2.5 feet. I'm hoping that's going to be the pollinator one. And that about wraps up this video. Thanks for watching. Get a t-shirt. Visit rockflux.com. Hopefully I got apples in another year or two. There's the morning glory. Peace out.